Before we start the story, write in the comments where are you watching from. In the radiant glow of a Caribbean sunrise, love was supposed to blossom. For Emily Parker, it was meant to be the beginning of forever, a honeymoon in paradise with her new husband, Jason. From the flower-adorned wedding on a sunlit hill in North Carolina to the golden shores of Turks and Caicos, everything appeared to be unfolding like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, Emily would soon discover, can hide jagged truths beneath their shimmering surface. The air in Asheville buzzed with late spring warmth, the scent of magnolias drifting lazily through the open windows of the country chapel. Emily Parker stood barefoot in front of a floor-length mirror, her satin gown hugging her waist, the hem brushing lightly against her ankles. Her cheeks were flushed, not just from the Georgia heat that crept into the North Carolina mountains, but from anticipation. Today, she would marry Jason Whitmore, her high school sweetheart, her college roommate's cousin, her rock, at least that's what she'd always told herself. He was smart, successful, and charming in that effortless way that made waitresses blush and old women pat his arm. Her friends called them perfect. Her mother beamed every time she mentioned his name. The past year had been a blur of cake tastings, invitation designs, and whispered promises under blankets. Jason had proposed on the edge of Central Park, ring gleaming beneath falling snow, and Emily had whispered yes through tears. But as she stood alone in the bridal suite, lacing her fingers tightly around the bouquet of calla lilies, a strange pressure pressed against her chest. She chalked it up to nerves. Every bride felt this way, on the edge of a leap, right? The ceremony unfolded like a dream. Her father walked her down the aisle with trembling hands. Jason waited with a grin so bright it rivaled the afternoon sun. Vows were exchanged beneath an arch of wildflowers, lips met in a kiss that earned cheers from their guests, and confetti rained down in hues of lavender and gold. Everything was perfect, or at least it looked that way. The reception rolled into twilight, guests tipsy on champagne and laughter. Emily caught Jason slipping outside twice to take calls for work, and each time he returned with a wider smile. She barely noticed. She was too wrapped in the magic of the evening, drunk on the illusion that this was the beginning of forever. 2 days later, they were on a flight to the Caribbean. Emily leaned against the airplane window, watching clouds drift below them like islands in a sea of sky. Jason dozed beside her, his hand limp against the armrest. His phone was face down on the tray table, and it buzzed once, then again. She glanced at it instinctively, expecting work. But the name that flashed made her pause. Allison. Her stomach twisted, unfamiliar and sour. She'd never heard of an Allison. And why the moon emoji? She hesitated, looking at Jason, still asleep. Her fingers hovered. She didn't open the phone. Not yet. Instead, she turned back to the window, willing her mind to quiet. It's nothing, she told herself. Someone from work, a cousin, a mistake. She had to believe it. She needed to believe it. The plane landed in Providenciales with a bounce. The airport was small and charming, open to the humid breeze that kissed her skin as they stepped outside. Jason pulled their luggage with ease, offering her a grin. "Ready for paradise, Mrs. Whitmore?" She smiled. "I've been ready." Their resort stood like a dream beside Grace Bay, white villas trimmed in seafoam green, palm trees swaying against a sapphire sky. They were led to a private bungalow with its own pool and outdoor shower. The bed was enormous, the minibar stocked with wine. There were rose petals scattered across the floor. That night, as waves whispered against the shore and Jason trailed kisses down her shoulder, Emily pushed the strange feeling away again. This was what they'd dreamed of, what she'd waited for. She let herself fall into the illusion once more, but the next morning, while Jason showered and left his phone unlocked on the nightstand, the name popped up again. Allison. "I miss our nights. It's not the same without you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the message as if it were a foreign language, her heart pounding in her ears. A second bubble appeared. Alison. Did she suspect anything yet? The world tilted. She put the phone down slowly, her hands cold despite the Caribbean heat. Her mouth was dry. The sound of running water seemed to come from a distant place. Her legs trembled as she stood. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't something she could explain away. The message had shattered the glass shell around her perfect life, and she couldn't unknow what she now knew. The shower shut off. Footsteps. Emily sat back on the bed and forced herself to breathe. Jason walked out with a towel slung around his waist, drying his hair. "Morning, babe," he said, not noticing her expression. "Want to grab breakfast on the beach?" She looked at him, really looked. The man she married 3 days ago. The man who had promised to love her forever. And for the first time, she wondered who exactly she had married. The sun spilled across the villa like melted gold, casting long shadows against the sleek tile floor. Emily barely noticed. She sat at the edge of the bed, her back straight, her fingers clenched around the sheet. Jason hummed to himself as he pulled on a linen shirt, blissfully unaware, or maybe just pretending. Her eyes followed him as he moved, the way he smiled to himself, the way he reached for his phone and typed something quickly, his fingers tapping with practiced familiarity. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him who Alison was. She wanted the truth, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she nodded silently when he asked again, "How about breakfast?" They walked to the beachfront cafe in silence. The air was thick with hibiscus and sea salt. Waves whispered against the shore, children laughed in the distance, and the scent of grilled pineapple and coconut drifted from the kitchen. It was paradise, but inside Emily, something had split open. They were seated beneath a palm-thatched umbrella. Jason ordered a mimosa and a tropical fruit platter. Emily asked for black coffee, though her stomach rebelled against the thought of anything warm. As he talked about their plans for the day, snorkeling, a catamaran ride, a private dinner on the beach, she smiled and nodded, but her thoughts churned behind her eyes. She excused herself under the pretense of needing to use the restroom. Instead, she walked along the sand, barefoot, the sea tugging at her ankles like a silent question. Her chest ached with the weight of what she had seen, the message, the flirtation, the implication. Emily thought about the way Jason had proposed, how he'd called her his soulmate, how he'd whispered about forever. But now forever felt like a lie. She knew what she'd read. It wasn't vague, it wasn't innocent. "I miss our nights. It's not the same without you." Did she suspect anything yet? The messages were deliberate, calculated, and they confirmed what she feared. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was something deeper, something ongoing. A breeze lifted her hair as she stared at the horizon. She remembered reading that the Caribbean was healing, that its waters were ancient and wise, that its sunsets held answers. But what answer was there for a woman betrayed on her honeymoon? By the time she returned to the table, Jason had finished his mimosa and was scrolling through Instagram. His eyes flicked up briefly. "Everything okay?" She sat down, her hands resting in her lap. "I'm just tired." He reached over and squeezed her knee. "Jet lag. We'll nap after snorkeling." She gave a tight smile. They spent the afternoon on a catamaran with 8 other couples. Jason laughed, drank rum punch, and dove from the deck with the ease of someone without a care in the world. Emily stayed quiet, her smile strained. A friendly woman from Chicago complimented her wedding ring and asked how long they'd been married. 3 days, Emily replied. "Oh, you still have the glow." Emily nodded, though inside she felt cold. When they returned to the villa that evening, Jason collapsed onto the lounge chair outside, already half asleep. Emily wandered inside and sat at the vanity. The sun was setting, casting lavender and rose across the sky. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. There was a knock at the door. Room service. She opened it to find a young man holding a silver tray with a folded card and a bottle of chilled white wine. "Special delivery from the groom," he said with a smile. "Thank you," she murmured. She opened the card. "To my beautiful wife. Here's to sunsets and forever. Love, Jason." She stared at the words, her throat tightening. The irony of it all felt cruel. She placed the card face down on the table and uncorked the wine herself. Jason came in later, slightly sunburned and cheerful. "Did you like the wine?" "It was thoughtful," she said softly. "You okay?" he asked again, narrowing his eyes. She hesitated. "Jason, is there something you want to tell me?" He paused. A flicker of something crossed his face. Fear? Annoyance? But it was gone in a second. "No? Why?" She wanted to push. She wanted to say his phone had buzzed and she had seen the name. She wanted to scream that Allison wasn't just some colleague, but part of her wanted to give him a chance to see if he'd confess. Instead, Jason chuckled, pulling her into his arms. "You're just overthinking, Em. You always do that when you're stressed." He kissed her temple. She stood there, unmoving. That night, as he slept beside her, snoring gently beneath white linen sheets, Emily stared at the ceiling, counting the rotations of the fan. The cracks in paradise were spreading. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd find answers, even if it meant breaking apart everything they'd just built. Morning came with the rustle of palm leaves and the distant cries of seagulls. The sky was a cloudless blue, the kind that demanded joy. But Emily's chest was heavy with a different kind of pressure, one that no sunshine could dissolve. She lay in bed, wide awake, long before Jason stirred. Her thoughts had raced all night, looping around one question: what now? Jason finally woke, stretching with a contented groan. "Sleep okay?" he asked, blinking at her through the golden light. "Not really," she answered plainly. He reached for her, but she slipped out of bed before his hand could touch her arm. "Shower," she muttered. "Then I want to take a walk." She didn't wait for a reply. Under the hot spray, Emily stared at the tiled wall. She pressed her forehead to the cool ceramic, letting the water wash away nothing. The words she'd read haunted her, looping like an echo. "I miss our nights. It's not the same without you. Allison." The name burned like salt in an open wound. After dressing in a white sundress and sandals, she grabbed her small purse and slipped out of the villa. The resort was still coming to life. Staff sweeping the walkways, birds chirping in the canopy. Emily passed the breakfast buffet without stopping. Her appetite had been replaced by a kind of resolve. She needed to know the full truth. There was a business center in the resort's main building. It wasn't much, just 2 desktop computers in a quiet room near the concierge desk. Emily slipped inside unnoticed. She logged into her email and searched for Jason's company, an environmental consulting firm based in Boston. She tried Allison in combination with the company name. A LinkedIn profile appeared: Allison Tate, Director of Operations, Boston Eco Renewal. Her stomach dropped. Jason had mentioned Allison once, briefly. "She's a workaholic," he'd said, "always emailing at midnight. Married to her job." Clearly not just her job. Emily opened Facebook in a separate tab. Allison's profile was private, but the cover photo was visible. A dimly lit restaurant. Candles. Jason's hand, his hand, was in the frame, resting on the table, unmistakably his from the silver ring he always wore on his right pinky. A date night, documented, public. Emily's hand trembled. It wasn't just messages. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. There had been moments, physical ones, dinner, Time spent together. The intimacy between them had existed long before the wedding vows. She stood up too quickly, her legs unsteady. The blood roared in her ears. "Emily!" Jason's voice startled her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway of the business center, sunglasses hanging from his shirt, his expression unreadable. "I looked for you," he said. "Figured you were getting coffee. What are you doing in here?" She didn't respond right away. She closed the browser tabs and shut down the computer. When she finally looked at him, her voice was steady. "We need to talk." Jason's smile faltered. "Okay." Back in the villa, Emily paced the room while Jason sat on the edge of the bed, watching her like a man cornered. "I saw your phone," she said. "The messages from Allison." He opened his mouth to object, but she held up a hand. "Don't lie to me, please." He closed his mouth again. Emily continued. "You've been seeing her, haven't you? Before the wedding, maybe even during." Jason sighed, rubbing his face. "It wasn't serious, I swear. It was just complicated. You and we were moving fast. I panicked." "Panicked?" she repeated, incredulous. "You cheated on me and married me anyway." "I thought it would end. I thought if we got married it would fix things, make me commit for real." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You thought marrying me would make you stop sleeping with another woman." Jason stood up, suddenly defensive. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes. You're not perfect either, Emily." "I never lied to you," she snapped. "I never brought someone else into our relationship." He looked at her, lips parted, then dropped his gaze. Silence fell. After a long moment, Emily walked to the closet and pulled out her suitcase. Jason's eyes widened. "Wait, what are you doing?" "Packing." "Come on, don't do this. Not now, not here." "Exactly here," she said. "Because this was supposed to be paradise, and now it's poisoned. I won't pretend for one more second." "You're overreacting." She turned to face him. "No, I'm reacting exactly as a woman who just found out her husband has been lying should." He stepped forward, but she stepped back. "Please don't touch me." Jason exhaled hard, frustration flashing in his eyes. "So what? This is it? We're done?" "I don't know," Emily whispered, "but I know I need space. Away from you. Away from this." She grabbed the suitcase handle and walked out the door. Outside, the Caribbean sun blazed overhead, but it couldn't reach the cold in her chest. She found the front desk and requested a separate room, one without ocean views, far from the honeymoon villas. By nightfall, she sat on a small private balcony, sipping water, staring at the stars, alone, free, terrified. But beneath the ache, a seed of something else took root. Liberation. The realization that even in a place built for two, she had chosen herself, and the trip wasn't over. Tomorrow she would wake up not as a betrayed wife, but as a woman taking her first step forward. The morning air smelled of hibiscus and brine. Emily awoke not to Jason's soft breathing beside her, but to the gentle whisper of the ocean beyond her modest, garden-facing balcony. For the first time in days, there was stillness. A silence not born from tension, but from solitude. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling fans spinning overhead, feeling the faint ache of emptiness in her chest. But she also sensed something else. A stirring, like the tide shifting beneath the sand. She had made the decision to leave the villa, to separate herself from Jason. She didn't know if it was forever, but she knew it had to be now. Every step since had felt excruciating, but necessary. And now, in this quiet room with no expectation of smiles, kisses, or pretending, she finally exhaled. Emily, dressed in linen shorts and a simple tank top, tied her hair into a loose ponytail and slipped into her sandals. Her skin welcomed the kiss of tropical air as she stepped outside. She wandered past the honeymoon villas without looking back, past couples holding hands, past the open-air bar where newlyweds were sipping pineapple cocktails. She could have felt envious, she could have turned bitter, but instead she felt empty in a peaceful way. There was an activities board posted near the concierge desk. She paused, scanning it. Island excursion, private boat tour and snorkeling, 10:30 a.m. today. Max 10 guests. Inquire within. Without overthinking it, she walked up to the concierge. Is there still space on the boat tour this morning? The young woman behind the desk checked the tablet. Yes, one spot left. Emily smiled. I'll take it. The boat left the dock 30 minutes later. It wasn't a flashy catamaran, just a sturdy white vessel named Sea Whisper with peeling paint and a friendly local guide named Matteo who wore mirrored sunglasses and a wide grin. There were 8 passengers total, a retired couple from Canada, 2 German backpackers, a honeymooning couple from Miami who held each other like the world might end, and one man traveling alone. He sat near the bow, legs stretched out, sunglasses hiding his eyes, a book resting on his lap. He looked up as Emily boarded, offering a polite nod. She returned it and sat on the opposite side of the boat. As the engine roared to life and the boat cut through turquoise waves, Emily felt something loosen inside her. The wind tangled her hair. Sun warmed her cheeks. The island began to shrink behind them. They stopped near a shallow coral reef where the water shimmered in impossible shades of blue. Matteo handed out snorkel gear and explained the rules. Emily had snorkeled once, years ago. She hesitated at first, then forced herself to try. As soon as her face dipped beneath the surface, the world transformed. Coral of every color sprawled below, a living tapestry of oranges, purples, and jade. Fish darted in flashes of silver and yellow. A sea turtle glided silently just beneath her, its ancient face serene. Underwater there was no heartbreak, no betrayal, no names, just breath and movement and color. When she finally surfaced, lungs aching from oar and effort, the man from the front of the boat was floating nearby. He pulled out his snorkel and grinned. Beautiful down there, isn't it? Emily wiped water from her face. Incredible. I always forget how small I am when I see something like that. His accent was gentle, European, Scandinavian maybe. His smile was calm, unassuming. I'm Henrik, he said, extending a hand in the water. Emily. She shook it, surprised by the firmness of his grip. They floated in silence for a moment, then he asked, First time here? She nodded. First time to the Caribbean. Same. I came to get away from, well, things. Emily smiled faintly. Same. And back on the boat, she found herself sitting beside him without quite realizing why. Henrik was Danish, early 40s, tall, with sun-bleached hair and kind eyes behind his sunglasses. He told her he'd gone through a painful divorce less than a year ago. No children, but 15 years of a life now gone. He'd come here to remember how to breathe again. They talked about the ocean, about travel, about silence and space and starting over. Not once did he ask if she was married. Not once did he assume. As they docked later that afternoon, Henrik turned to her. Would you like to get a drink sometime? No pressure, just a drink. Emily hesitated. Everything in her life felt like shattered glass, but in Henrik's eyes she saw no judgment, no expectation, just possibility. She smiled softly. Yeah, I'd like that. That night, back in her quiet room, Emily opened her journal for the first time since arriving. She wrote, Today, I floated above a coral reef and felt weightless. I talked to a stranger and didn't feel like hiding. Maybe healing doesn't happen in one sweep, but in 100 gentle moments. She closed the journal and looked out her window. The Caribbean moon was high, silver on the sea. Something new had begun. She wasn't sure what or how far it would go. But she knew this. Her story was no longer about what had been lost. It was becoming a story of what she might still find. The next morning brought the rain. Not the quick, teasing Caribbean showers that disappeared in 5 minutes, but a steady, soulful downpour that painted the resort in silver. Palms swayed gently under the wet breeze, and the beach lay deserted beneath a slate-grey sky. It was as if the island, too, needed to cry. Emily didn't mind. It matched her mood, cleansed, quiet, uncertain. She stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching rivulets race down the glass. She had expected today to feel heavier, maybe lonelier. Instead, she felt a strange openness, as if something inside her had been unknotted just a bit. The message light on her hotel room phone blinked, a small pulse of red. Curious, she pressed the button. The voice was low, familiar. "Hi, Emily. It's Henrik. They said it might rain all day. But there's a place in town, a little cafe near the harbor. They say the rum punch is the best on the island. I'm heading there around 2. No pressure, of course, but if you feel like escaping the walls, I'd love the company." She smiled. It was the softest invitation she had received in a long time. By 2:30, the rain had eased into a misty drizzle. Emily, wrapped in a light cardigan, walked slowly through cobbled alleys of pastel buildings. The harbor town was old and beautiful, with brightly painted homes and wrought-iron balconies overflowing with flowers, even in the rain. She found the cafe easily. A small, warm place tucked into the corner of a narrow street with faded murals of mermaids and musicians on its exterior walls. The sign above the door simply read, "Isla Azul." Henrik was already there, seated by a window, a book in one hand and a half-empty glass in the other. When he saw her, his face lit up, not with surprise, but with something quieter, something that said, "I hoped you'd come." She took the seat across from him. "Rum punch?" he offered, raising a finger to the waiter. "Why not?" She smiled. The first sip burned gently, then blossomed with notes of pineapple, cinnamon, and lime. The heat of it traveled through her, calming her nerves. They talked about music, about the strangeness of traveling alone, about the kind of silence that feels good rather than hollow. Henrik was easy to speak with. He didn't pry, but listened in a way that made her feel heard, even when she wasn't saying much. Eventually, the conversation took a deeper turn. Henrik traced the edge of his glass. "I thought I'd feel guilty enjoying anything again, after the divorce, I mean. Like joy was somehow a betrayal." Emily nodded. "I know the feeling." "You do?" "I just found out, during my honeymoon no less, that the man I married had been talking to someone else. Romantically, maybe even physically, I don't know, but he was. Not where I thought he was. And now I'm here, alone, trying to understand what that means." Henrik didn't blink. He didn't shift awkwardly in his chair. He just held her gaze and said quietly, "I'm sorry. That must feel like falling through the floor." "It does," she admitted, and then somehow landing in paradise, which makes the fall even weirder. They both laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Later the rain stopped. They wandered through the harbor town together. Henrik pointed out a little bookstore tucked between 2 rum shops. Emily led him to a street vendor selling grilled pineapple and coconut bread. They sat on a low stone wall, eating warm slices and watching boats bob in the dock. Henrik turned to her. "I don't want to be inappropriate, Emily, but I like being around you. It's not about escaping anything, it's just nice. You're nice." She flushed, surprised at how deeply the word struck her. Not beautiful or interesting, but nice. There was a softness to it, a sincerity. "I like being around you too," she said, "but I'm not ready for anything." "You don't have to be," he said simply. "We can just walk, talk, be 2 people who met on an island during a storm." She smiled. "That sounds about right." That night, back in her room, Emily stood barefoot on the balcony. Below, the garden shimmered with the remnants of the rain. Frogs chirped in the bushes. Somewhere in the distance, soft music floated from the bar. She felt no guilt for spending time with Henrik. No confusion, just warmth, a flicker of something healing. Maybe what she needed wasn't to replace what had been lost, but to discover what still remained in her. Courage, curiosity, the ability to laugh in the rain with a stranger. She whispered into the night air, "I think I'm going to be okay." And for the first time, she believed it. The following morning welcomed Emily with a soft orange light that peeked through the thin white curtains. The storm had passed, leaving the island drenched in sunlight and a crisp, earthy scent. Birds chirped exuberantly as if celebrating the return of clear skies, and in the distance, the sound of waves crashing against the shore reminded her that paradise was still here, waiting. She took her time rising. There was no rush, no schedule. For once, she was free of obligation, no husband waiting, no itinerary calling. It was just her, the island, and the slow rhythm of rediscovery. After breakfast, tropical fruit, toasted bread, and a strong dark coffee, Emily walked down to the beach with a book in hand. Not to read, really, just to carry something, to feel whole. She found a quiet spot near a cluster of smooth rocks, shaded slightly by a coconut palm. As the tide rolled in, she watched the horizon and allowed herself to think not about betrayal or loss, but about what she wanted now. And surprisingly, Henrik drifted into her thoughts. Not in the way she had thought of James. With James, there had always been a pressure to perform, to be the perfect partner, to impress. But Henrik, he made space for her thoughts, her silence. She felt no need to fill the air with chatter around him. He had given her the gift of quiet connection. It was subtle, but powerful. Her phone buzzed beside her. "Henrik, there's a local boat tour leaving from the East Dock in an hour. They say it stops at hidden coves and an old shipwreck. Want to come? I'll bring snacks." She stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers poised above the keyboard. Then she smiled and typed back, "Emily, count me in. Just let me grab my swimsuit and a brave heart." The boat was a small wooden vessel named Calypso, painted turquoise with a white trim. Henrik was already aboard when she arrived, dressed in a light linen shirt and shorts, holding a canvas bag. "You came," he said with a grin. "You promised snacks," she teased. The captain, a wiry man named Thomas with sun-weathered skin and a twinkle in his eye, greeted them warmly and guided the boat out into the shimmering blue. As they sailed, Emily marveled at the ever-changing colors of the sea. From sapphire to aquamarine to jade. The water was so clear she could see the shifting patterns of coral and schools of silver fish darting beneath them. They passed secluded beaches, rock formations shaped by wind and time, and caves hidden by hanging vines. Thomas pointed out landmarks. A cliff shaped like a lion's head, a natural arch carved by hurricanes, and a cove locals called La Boca del Amor, the mouth of love. "Ironic," Emily muttered. Henrik heard her. "Or maybe hopeful." She tilted her head. "What do you mean? Maybe love doesn't just close its mouth. Maybe it waits until you're ready to open yours again." She smiled at that. Not because it was romantic, but because it felt true. The boat dropped anchor in a quiet lagoon where the water turned a brilliant turquoise. A narrow beach wrapped around it like a crescent moon, and in the center of the bay sat the rusted remains of a half-sunken ship, its hull now a playground for fish and coral. Henrik handed her a snorkel mask. "Ready?" "A day born ready," she said, surprising herself. They dove into the water, the coolness shocking at first, then comforting. Beneath the surface, the world transformed, colors brighter, sounds muffled. Emily swam slowly, taking in the beauty. Yellow-striped fish weaving between coral fans, sea urchins clinging to rocks, and starfish resting on the sandy floor. Henrik swam beside her, occasionally pointing out a rare creature or unique coral structure. They shared silent glances, smiles through their masks. For a brief time, there were no past betrayals, no pain, only the two of them, suspended in the dreamlike calm of the Caribbean Sea. Back on the boat, towels wrapped around them, they sat side by side, drying in the sun. "Did you know," Henrik began, handing her a mango, "that the shipwreck back there was once used to smuggle rum during the Prohibition?" She laughed. "You're just full of historical trivia. I used to be a high school history teacher before I joined my brother's business," he said, peeling his mango slice. "Teaching gave me purpose, but the divorce, it took the wind out of my sails. I needed to find something new." Emily listened, genuinely curious. "And have you?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but I think I've found where to start." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long golden rays across the sea, the boat turned back. Emily leaned against the railing, her hair tousled by the wind, her skin glowing from sun and salt. Henrik stood beside her, not touching, not pressing, just present. When the island came into view again, Emily turned to him. "Thank you for today, for not asking for anything more than what I could give." Henrik looked into her eyes. "Emily, I'm not here to take. I'm here to witness. Whatever part of your story you choose to share." Her throat tightened. That night, back at the resort, she lay in bed thinking not about what she had lost, but about what she had just begun to find. Not just someone new, but herself. And maybe, just maybe, the island wasn't just a place to escape the past. Maybe it was the place where second chances grew like wildflowers, untamed and radiant. Emily woke before sunrise. The air in the room was cool, filled with the distant hum of the ocean and the soft rustling of palm fronds brushing against the window. A strange sensation pulsed quietly in her chest, an emotion that hadn't visited her in weeks. Anticipation. She walked barefoot to the balcony. The sky was still a velvety blue, stars fading slowly, and the horizon glowed with the earliest blush of dawn. There, seated on a beach chair, she watched the light creep across the water, breaking the night open. This morning, everything felt different. Not because her problems had vanished, but because she no longer felt trapped inside them. She was beginning to live again. She thought of Henrik, of his easy smile and the way he'd given her space without withdrawing his warmth. He was the first person she'd truly talked to since discovering James's betrayal, and she was beginning to feel the ache of wanting more time with him. Later that day, she met Henrik for breakfast at a small open-air cafe. The wooden floor creaked beneath their chairs, and bright tropical flowers adorned each table in mason jars. The smell of baked plantains and fresh cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. Henrik was already seated, wearing a soft green linen shirt and a pair of sunglasses pushed up onto his head. "I ordered coffee," he said, smiling as she approached. "I guessed you'd need at least 2 cups to match your usual spark." She chuckled. "You guessed right. I'm not fully human until I've had caffeine." Their conversation flowed like a familiar stream. They talked about the snorkeling adventure, his teaching days, and how he once tried to learn to surf and broke his toe. Emily found herself laughing, really laughing, more than she had in months. "I've been thinking about visiting the rainforest," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "There's a guided hike through the island's interior. Waterfalls, hidden pools, maybe even monkeys." "I'm in," Henrik said without hesitation. "Nature and I have an agreement. I don't step on snakes and it doesn't rain on me." "Deal," she replied with a grin. The trail into the rainforest began at the edge of the island's eastern ridge. A local guide named Rosa led them and a small group of other travelers into the dense green world. The path narrowed beneath towering mahogany trees and thick vines draped like curtains. Birds called out high above, unseen but ever present. As they walked, the scent of damp earth filled Emily's senses, grounding her. Leaves glistened with dew, insects buzzed softly, and small lizards darted across the path. Henrik walked beside her, quiet but alert, occasionally pointing out a rare orchid or brightly colored bird. After about an hour of hiking, they reached the first waterfall. Water cascaded down mossy rocks into a crystal-clear pool. The group set down their packs, and Rosa encouraged them to swim. Emily hesitated at the edge, her hand brushing the water. "It's cold." Henrik stepped beside her. "It's only cold until you dive in, like most things worth doing." She looked at him, something tightening inside her. That sentence echoed, deeper than it should have. Without thinking too long, she took his hand and jumped. The water was a shock, cold, electric, pure. They surfaced, laughing, breathless, water streaming down their faces. The group cheered behind them, and for that moment, it was as if Emily had washed away all the doubt, all the pain. When she floated on her back, staring up at the sliver of sky between the trees, she felt it fully, freedom. That evening, Emily sat on the beach alone, watching the waves. Henrik had gone back to his bungalow to shower, but not before offering to meet her later for dinner. She needed this moment to herself. The sky had turned a deep rose gold, and the horizon shimmered. She thought back to her wedding day, how full of hope she'd been, how convinced she was that her story had found its happy ending. But life had torn that image away, and now something new was forming in its place. She thought of the waterfall, of Henrik's words, of how her heart had begun to flutter again. She wasn't naive, she wasn't rushing, but she was opening, and it no longer felt like betrayal to her old self. It felt like healing. When Henrik returned, he was dressed in soft grey and brought a small bottle of wine he'd found in a local shop. "I thought we could toast," he said, "to unexpected beginnings." They sat together under the stars, their feet buried in sand, a simple dinner between them, local fish, sweet potatoes, and grilled pineapple. The wine was dry and the sea breeze cool. Emily felt warmth growing, not from the alcohol, but from being near someone who truly saw her without needing to fix her. As they clinked their glasses, Henrik said, "Emily, you don't have to say anything back, but I want you to know. You've reminded me what it feels like to connect, to be real again." Tears prickled in her eyes. "You too," she whispered. "I didn't expect any of this, but I'm glad it happened." They sat in silence, the kind that felt like music, and as the moon rose over the Caribbean, painting the waves with silver, Emily leaned her head gently onto Henrik's shoulder. She wasn't healed yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the path ahead, because sometimes the light only returns after the darkness has fully had its turn. The morning after their evening on the beach felt like the beginning of something fragile and beautiful. Emily awoke with a rare sense of peace. It wasn't euphoria, just calm, and that was more than enough. She took her time getting ready, letting the warm Caribbean water run over her skin in the shower. Outside, the island was already alive. Birds chirped in a rhythmic harmony, and distant laughter floated from the pool area. Henrik had left a note under her door. "Boat trip today, just us. Leaving at 10. Wear something that can handle wind and wonder. H." She smiled, folding the note like it was something precious. At 9:55 a.m., she stepped outside in a light sundress over her swimsuit, a pair of sunglasses on her head, and the wind playing with strands of her hair. Henrik was waiting by the dock. He'd rented a small sailboat from a local captain who smiled knowingly as they boarded. The boat was just big enough for the two of them, with a shaded bench, a small cooler, and enough room to lie back and feel the salt air. The captain pushed them off with a gentle wave, then turned the helm over to Henrik after giving a few instructions in accented English. "So," Henrik said, casting off the line, "are you ready to get lost at sea for a few hours?" "If it's with you," Emily replied, surprising herself, "then yes, I think I am." They sailed along the coastline, the island retreating behind them like a dream fading into light. The water changed from turquoise to deep sapphire. The wind filled the sail, and the boat skimmed across the waves like a skipping stone. Henrik handled the sail with surprising ease, explaining the basics as they moved. Emily sat beside him, feet propped up, heart open. "I used to fantasize about doing this," he said. "After my divorce, I kept saying I'd go sailing, but I didn't. I just buried myself in work. And what changed?" "You," he answered simply. "Meeting you reminded me that I'm still alive, that life isn't over just because one chapter ends." Emily looked away, heart stinging, because she understood that feeling too well. "It's strange," she said. "You think love will protect you, anchor you, but sometimes it's the very thing that drowns you." Henrik nodded, not pushing, just listening. "But today," she continued, "I don't feel like I'm drowning. Today I feel like maybe I can float." They didn't speak after that for a while. The silence between them didn't need to be filled. The wind, the waves, the creaking of the boat, they said enough. They anchored near a secluded cove around midday. White sand, untouched. Water so clear you could count the starfish below. No tourists. Just nature and the two of them. They swam together, splashing like teenagers, their laughter echoing against the rocks. Later they shared sandwiches and fresh mango from the cooler, sitting on the boat's deck, sun drying their skin. Henrik pulled out a waterproof camera and began taking candid shots. Emily laughing, Emily diving, Emily staring out to sea. She normally hated pictures of herself, but this was different. These were not the posed, perfect smiles of social media. These were real. As the sun dipped lower, the sky painted in strokes of lavender and gold. Henrik handed her a photo he'd printed out before their trip, a snapshot of the two of them from their rainforest hike, wet and laughing, cheeks flushed. "I don't want to forget this," he said, "even if you leave. Even if we never see each other again. I need to remember that this, what we had here, it was real." Tears filled Emily's eyes. Why would we never see each other again? Because sometimes people walk out of our lives as quickly as they entered. But what if we don't let that happen? He smiled. Then we'll have to be very brave. She reached for his hand. "I think I'm ready to be brave." The moment held between them like a held breath, and then, finally, they kissed. Not rushed, not desperate, but slow, tender, full of everything unspoken. That night, back at the resort, Emily stood by her balcony as the moon rose high over the ocean. She wasn't naive. This wasn't a fairy tale. She still had a marriage to legally dissolve. She still had pain to untangle, a life back home to sort through. But for now, for this fleeting, sun-kissed moment, she allowed herself to believe in something new, something healing, something true. She turned, and Henrik was already there, waiting for her in the doorway. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, for tonight was a day without ghosts. The following morning, Emily woke before sunrise. The room was quiet, except for the low murmur of the waves outside, and Henrik's soft, steady breathing beside her. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, and moved to the balcony where the Caribbean was still veiled in pale blue mist. Something inside her was shifting. The past clung like salt on her skin, but it was no longer suffocating. The pain hadn't vanished. It had simply made room for something else. Clarity. She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal she had brought with her but never used. At first, she just stared at the blank page, unsure what to write. Then, in a slow, deliberate hand, she began to write a letter. But not to Henrik, to Jason, the man she had married, the man who had broken her heart on the eve of their future. Dear Jason, I don't know if I'll ever send this, but I need to write it. For me. When I first met you, I truly believed you were the one. You made me laugh, feel seen, feel chosen, and for a while we were good together, but somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me. Or maybe you never really did. I used to blame myself. Was I too much? Not enough? Did I miss signs? Did I expect too much? But the truth is, none of those questions matter now. What matters is that I deserved better. I found out about her, the messages, the way you looked at your phone and smiled like I used to make you smile. I don't know how long it was going on or how serious it was, but what I do know is that it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to make me feel like a placeholder. You chose dishonesty over truth, distance over intimacy, cowardice over confrontation, and yet I forgive you, not because you asked for it, not because you deserve it, but because I need to set myself free. Holding on to this betrayal has been like holding on to fire. I've burned myself again and again, waiting for it to turn into light. But now I know some things don't illuminate, they only scorch. I'm writing this from a place so beautiful, it feels like the sky and sea are conspiring to heal me. And in the middle of all this pain, I met someone who reminded me that I am still capable of joy, of laughter, of hope. His name is Henrik. No, this isn't about replacing you. It's about rediscovering me. The version of myself I almost lost trying to hold on to a dream that was already broken. I won't ask you why. I won't ask you to explain. The truth is, I no longer need answers. I wish you peace, Jason, but I wish myself more. Emily. She stared at the letter, tears running silently down her cheeks. It wasn't rage or grief that filled her now. It was release. She didn't need to mail it. She folded the page, tucked it into the journal, and felt something inside her settle. Behind her, Henrik stirred. He came outside, shirtless, hair tousled, with a sleepy smile that made her heart warm. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I had some things I needed to let go of," she said, leaning into him. "Did it work?" She turned to face him. "I think I'm finally making room for the right things." He kissed her forehead. "Then let's fill that space with something beautiful." Later that day, they went snorkeling along a coral reef just off a nearby quay. It was Henrik's idea, and though Emily had been hesitant, never much of a swimmer, she found herself enchanted. Underwater, the world was silent and slow. Schools of brightly colored fish swam past in shimmering clouds. Coral bloomed in strange, otherworldly shapes. The sunlight filtered through the waves like a living tapestry. She surfaced and laughed, truly laughed, and Henrik was right there beside her, sharing the joy like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't just a vacation anymore, it was a rebirth. That evening, they sat at a tiny cliffside restaurant that overlooked the endless sea. A local band played soft jazz on steel drums and acoustic guitar. The scent of grilled pineapple and spiced rum filled the air. They talked about their pasts, not as wounds, but as stories. About Henrik's lonely nights after his divorce, about Emily's years of trying to prove herself worthy of someone who had already looked away. "I think you saved me," Emily said, her voice almost a whisper. Henrik reached across the table, taking her hand. "I didn't save you, Emily. I just reminded you how to swim." Back in the room, she took the letter from the journal and tucked it into the drawer of the nightstand. It didn't need to travel. It had already served its purpose. And now, so would she. Emily awoke to the warmth of sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains, golden and soft as honey. The Caribbean was calm this morning, with gentle waves rolling ashore like whispers. She lay there for a moment, listening to the slow rhythm of Henrik's breathing beside her and feeling something unfamiliar and sacred: peace. Today marked the final day of her journey, the trip that was meant to be a honeymoon and had turned into something far more profound. In a few short days, she had walked through heartbreak, faced the crumbling of illusions, and emerged, if not whole, then healing. Henrik stirred and turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers with a softness she hadn't known she needed. "Morning," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Morning," she replied, her voice quiet but sure. "Do you want to go see the sunset with me tonight? One last time before I fly out?" Henrik hesitated only for a second before smiling. "I was going to ask you the same thing." They spent the day revisiting the places that had defined their journey together. They strolled the old colonial streets of the nearby town, where pastel buildings leaned gently over cobblestone paths. Street vendors sold hand-painted tiles and woven bracelets. Children ran barefoot through the alleyways. There was music always, on corners, on balconies, in the heartbeat of the island itself. They laughed over coconuts with straws and shared sweet plantains from a food cart. Henrik bought her a silver ring with a tiny turquoise stone from an old woman who claimed it brought luck in matters of the heart. Emily slipped it onto her finger, smiling not at the idea of luck, but at the idea that she could still believe in beginnings. Later, they returned to the beach near their hotel. The sun was beginning to lower, casting long shadows and washing the sky in blush and lavender. They spread out a blanket, close enough to the water that the breeze brought with it the scent of salt and wildflowers. Henrik reached into his backpack and pulled out 2 glasses and a small bottle of rum punch. He handed one to her. "A toast?" he said. "To what?" He looked into her eyes. "To what hurts, and to what heals." They clinked glasses, and the moment felt like a ceremony. As the sky bled into shades of fire and indigo, Emily lay back and watched the stars begin to appear. One by one, like truths she had once been too afraid to name, she turned to Henrik. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I do, but not with fear anymore. I used to be afraid I'd never feel again, never trust, never try, but meeting you changed that." A pause. "And what about you?" Emily looked out over the horizon, where sea met sky. "I think I finally understand that life doesn't always follow the path we imagine. It twists, breaks, and sometimes it gives us something we didn't ask for, but maybe what we always needed." Henrik was quiet, as if giving space to her words. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her eyes widened in surprise. "I wrote something last night," he said. "I didn't know if I should give it to you." He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. "Dear Emily, I came here to disappear. I came to the Caribbean with a broken heart and no plan. I didn't expect to meet someone who would awaken every corner of myself I thought had gone numb. You made me laugh again. You listened without judgment. You reminded me that connection is not about perfection, but presence. I don't want this to end just because the trip does. If you want to go back to your life, I will respect that. If you want space, I'll give it. But if there's even a small part of you that wants to keep discovering what this could be, then I'm here, ready and open. No pressure, no expectations, just hope." Henrik tears filled Emily's eyes as she finished reading, not because she was sad, but because it had been so long since someone had offered love without a hidden condition. She looked up at him, and the words came naturally. "I don't want this to end either." Henrik smiled, a little unsure, but entirely full of light. What do we do then? Emily thought for a moment. Let's not overthink it. Let's just begin. That night, they danced barefoot in the sand as the stars wheeled overhead. No music but the ocean. No promises but the ones written in each gentle touch. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew what this moment was. Raw, beautiful, and completely theirs. And sometimes one true moment is enough to start forever. The morning after their sunset together, Emily stood at the airport, her luggage beside her. Henrik was with her, his presence comforting, grounding, but there was a bittersweet quality in the air. It was the end of this chapter, this small, perfect moment in time that had come to mean more to her than she could explain. She could feel the weight of it as she checked in, the finality of leaving the island, but there was something else too, hope, a quiet and certain promise that despite the distance they would soon place between them, something had changed in her. Something had healed. Henrik stood beside her, shifting from foot to foot, as if reluctant to leave her side. She smiled at him, even though the sadness was there in her chest, like an echo of something already left behind. "You'll be okay," he said, his eyes soft. "This isn't goodbye." Emily nodded, but she wasn't sure if it was the truth. Not yet. "I'll be okay," she repeated, trying to convince herself more than him. "I'm starting to think that's what this trip was about. Healing. It's like I came here broken, and I'm leaving with pieces of myself put back together." He smiled gently, touching her arm. "Good. Then I did my job." She reached for his hand. "You did more than that." There was an awkward silence as they stood there, waiting for her flight to be called. Emily felt her throat tighten, the words she wanted to say but couldn't form properly, swirling inside her. There was so much more she wanted to ask him. Could this really work? Could they keep in touch? Would it just fade as most things did? But the truth was, she was afraid of caring too much, afraid of losing something before it had truly begun. "I'll miss you," she whispered, her voice a soft confession. Henrik leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear, his breath warm. "I'll miss you too, but we're just a flight away." It wasn't until she boarded the plane that she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening. She settled into her seat, buckling her belt, gazing out of the window as the plane began to taxi down the runway. The island, now shrinking beneath them, seemed to have given her something more than just a vacation or a fling. It had given her perspective, clarity, and a glimpse into what it meant to truly begin again. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Emily closed her eyes and allowed herself a few quiet moments. When she opened them again, her thoughts drifted to Henrik. He had been kind, patient, and understanding, but did he really understand? Could he possibly know what she was carrying inside her, what she was still working through? Or had he just become a chapter of healing, a brief yet beautiful interlude? She didn't know, but what she did know was that for the first time in a long while, she was thinking of the future not with dread, but with curiosity. The rest of the flight was uneventful, her mind wandering in and out of memories. The soft glow of the Caribbean sun, the sound of the steel drums, the warmth of Henrik's touch. But there was still the reality of her life waiting back home, her apartment, her job, her friends, her past. She was going back to her life, yes, but she wasn't the same person who had left. The airport back in the States felt different. The cold air hit her face as she stepped outside, the sky overcast and a little grey. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, clutching her phone as she waited for her ride. The ride back home was quieter than she expected. The city was bustling, people everywhere. But Emily felt like an outsider, like she was carrying a secret inside her, a part of her life that didn't fit with the daily routine she used to know. She stared out of the window, her thoughts tangled in 1,000 directions. When she reached her apartment, it was as if everything in her world had resumed its previous rhythm. The same familiar walls, the same furniture, the same space that used to feel like a sanctuary now felt like a reminder of what she had been holding on to before. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Henrik. "I'm glad you're home safe. Let's talk soon." Emily smiled, her fingers hovering over the keys. She was tired, exhausted from the journey, physically and emotionally. But there was something there, something in the simplicity of his words. He hadn't pressured her, he hadn't asked for anything. He had just left her space, a feeling of understanding that was both comforting and overwhelming. She typed a reply. "Thank you, Henrik. I'll reach out soon." That evening, after unpacking and settling in, Emily found herself sitting by the window, gazing out at the city lights. It was the same city, the same life, but she wasn't the same. Her phone rang again. Paris, the city of love. Emily had always dreamed of visiting it, but she had never imagined she'd come here under the circumstances that she now found herself in. Not as a tourist, checking off items from a bucket list, but as a woman who had discovered love, heartbreak, and healing. She was here with Henrik, not because it was some romantic fantasy, but because they had made the choice together to write their own story. No expectations, no pressures. Just the two of them, ready to explore life as it came. The moment they stepped off the plane and onto the streets of Paris, the city felt alive in a way that was different from any other place they had been. The streets were filled with the hum of conversation in a foreign tongue, the scent of freshly baked croissants wafting through the air, and the sight of the Eiffel Tower towering above them, a symbol of romance and timeless beauty. But it wasn't just the picturesque setting or the allure of Paris itself that made Emily feel alive. It was the way she felt when she was with Henrik, the way he made her feel seen, heard, and cared for in a way she had never experienced before. Every time their eyes met, there was a depth between them that she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the chemistry or the shared moments of joy. It was the quiet understanding that they had both faced their own demons and had chosen to be together, despite everything that could have kept them apart. As they walked hand in hand down the cobblestone streets of the Marais district, Henrik smiled at Emily. "So, how do you like Paris so far?" Emily glanced up at him, the twinkle in his eye making her heart skip a beat. "It's perfect. It's everything I imagined and more." She paused, looking around at the cafe-lined streets and the artists painting along the sidewalk. "But honestly, I think it's perfect because we're here together. It wouldn't be the same without you." Henrik's smile softened. "I feel the same way, Emily. I know we've had our ups and downs, but every moment we've shared has made me realize that we're building something worth fighting for. Something real." They stopped in front of a small cafe with outdoor seating, its striped umbrellas offering shade from the afternoon sun. The waiter greeted them warmly as they sat down at a table by the window, the bustling energy of the street filling the air. Emily looked out across the street, watching as Parisians moved about, their lives unfolding in a flurry of activity. She thought back to her life before Henrik, to the way she had felt stuck in a cycle, unsure of what was next. Now she realized that life was full of unexpected twists, moments that could change everything in an instant. "I used to think that love was something you had to search for," Emily said, her voice thoughtful, "that you had to go looking for it, chasing it, trying to make it work. But being with you has shown me that love isn't something you find. It's something you create, together." Henrik leaned in, his hand gently brushing hers across the table. "And it's not always easy. There's no perfect path, no perfect love, but the beauty is in the journey, the way we navigate the twists and turns, the way we support each other, even when it gets hard." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. I've never felt more certain of anything in my life than I do right now. I know we don't have all the answers, but I believe in us. I believe in this." As they sipped their coffee, they discussed their plans for the next few days, exploring the museums, taking a Seine River cruise, and of course, visiting the Eiffel Tower at night. But more than that, they talked about the future. It wasn't about where they'd go next, or how long they would stay in Paris. It was about the promise of continuing to build something real, no matter where life took them. Henrik looked at her with a seriousness that made her pause. "Emily, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, something that's been on my mind for a while now." Her heart raced in anticipation. "What is it?" Henrik took a deep breath, his hand still holding hers. "I know we've only been together for a short time, and I know that love doesn't come with guarantees, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've changed my world, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Emily, will you marry me?" The words hung in the air between them, the weight of them both beautiful and terrifying. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Her first instinct was to say yes, but then she realized that this wasn't just a romantic gesture. This was Henrik, the man who had seen her through her brokenness, who had loved her without hesitation. And now he was asking her to take the biggest leap of faith, to commit to a future, no matter how uncertain or unpredictable it might be. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Henrik, I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to spend it with you. I want to build a life with you." Henrik's eyes lit up as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it to reveal a delicate, simple ring, he smiled. "I don't need to know all the answers either, but I know this. I want to take that leap with you, Emily. Will you say yes?" Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart full of emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Henrik, I will marry you." Henrik placed the ring on her finger, his smile radiant. As they embraced, the world around them seemed to fall away. There was no more fear, no more doubt. There was only the certainty that no matter what life threw their way, they would face it together. The future was unknown, but for the first time, Emily felt ready to face it, side by side with the man she loved. She didn't need the answers. She didn't need the promises. All she needed was him, and that was enough. The days that followed were filled with a warmth that was more than just the summer sun. They were the kind of days that marked the beginning of something new, something real and lasting. Emily and Henrik had returned to their hotel room after their engagement, and everything seemed different. They had crossed a threshold, one that felt like a passage into a deeper kind of love, a love that was built on the experiences they had shared, the moments they had endured, and the promises they had made. Emily lay awake in bed that night, the sound of the city drifting in through the open window. Paris was alive with energy, laughter, music, the distant hum of conversation, and it felt like the city was celebrating with them. She turned over to look at Henrik, who was asleep beside her, his face peaceful in the soft moonlight that spilled through the window. He had asked her to marry him in the most unexpected way. No grand gestures, no extravagant displays of wealth. Just two people in the heart of Paris, committing to each other in the quiet of their own hearts. And yet, it was the most beautiful, meaningful moment of her life. As she looked at Henrik, Emily realized that her heart had finally healed. She had come to Paris with so many questions about herself, about love, about the future, and she had found the answers she needed, not in the grand gestures or the promises of forever, but in the simple act of showing up for each other, day after day. The next morning they woke up to the soft chime of a church bell in the distance, signaling the start of a new day. Emily smiled as she stretched, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer the woman who had boarded that plane to Paris, unsure of her future and heartbroken by the past. She was someone new, a woman who had discovered that love could be both tender and fierce, that it could heal and transform, and that it was worth fighting for. Henrik reached over and kissed her forehead, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Good morning, my love." Emily's heart fluttered at the sound of those words. The same man who had once been a stranger to her, who had stood beside her as a friend, now held her heart in his hands. "Good morning," she whispered back, her voice soft. "I think this is the happiest I've ever been." Henrik smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're just getting started, Emily. There's so much more ahead of us." For a moment they simply lay there, savoring the peace that came from knowing they were no longer alone in their journey. They had found each other, and in each other they had found the home they had been searching for. After breakfast, they ventured out into the streets of Paris once again. They visited the Louvre, walked along the Seine, and sat in a quiet cafe, sipping wine and watching the world go by. But this time, everything felt different. They weren't just tourists in a foreign city. They were two people building a life together, one day at a time. As the evening drew near, they found themselves at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, waiting for the lights to flicker on. Emily had always dreamed of seeing the tower light up at night, but now, standing there with Henrik by her side, the dream felt even more meaningful. The lights of the Eiffel Tower blinked to life, casting a soft glow over the city. It was as if the world had paused for just a moment, holding its breath in awe of the beauty and magic of Paris. Henrik took her hand, and they stood there, watching the tower shimmer in the night sky. "This is perfect," Emily whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "It is," Henrik agreed, his voice warm and full of affection. "But you know what's even more perfect?" Emily turned to look at him, a curious smile on her lips. "What?" "You," Henrik said simply. "You're perfect, Emily. And I can't wait to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much you mean to me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at him. She had never believed in perfect love, not until now. She had always thought love was messy, uncertain, and full of pain. But with Henrik, she had learned that love could also be simple, gentle, and pure. "I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I love you more than I ever thought possible." Henrik smiled, pulling her into an embrace. "I love you too, Emily, and I always will." In that moment, standing beneath the sparkling lights of the Eiffel Tower, Emily knew that her life had come full circle. The pain and heartbreak of her past had led her here, to this moment of joy and contentment. And as they held each other in the quiet of the Parisian night, she realized that their love was just beginning. The future was still unknown, but together they were ready to face whatever came next. They didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to know what the next year, the next decade, or the next lifetime would hold. All they needed was each other. And that, Emily thought, was enough. If you made it this far, please leave a comment about what you thought. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.